Hi everyone, my name is David Smith. I'd like to thank you for tuning into this presentation. I'd also like to thank all the markers who contributed to marking this question throughout this difficult year, but they marked to a very high standard. I'm very pleased with how it all ended up. Also, congratulations to all the teachers out there who've taken a cohort through these last two demanding years. I bet we would thought we'd never seen this in our lifetime, but well done to everyone who's actually got their cohort through 2 years of an advanced maths course. I'm going to start with question 18. Question 18 was very well done by the advanced cohort. It's a common question with standard 2, and the advanced cohort were very successful at answering this sign rule question. The solution's on the screen there, and you can see the most important thing was they're able to get to the obtuse angle. I'll get to that later. In the better responses, students went through this beautifully. They found an angle using the sign rule. Then they're able to apply the ambiguous case to find an obtuse angle by using their angles of any magnitude, which was sine theta equals sine 180 degrees minus theta. The better students used the sign rule appropriately, and they started with the angle on the top, which was the unknown. I want to give a special shout out to those students who found an expression for an angle and an expression for the side using the cosine rule, solved them simultaneously, and use a quadratic formula to obtain the correct result. It was an absolutely brilliant piece of mathematics I saw a few times. Unfortunately, no extra marks are awarded for a high degree of difficulty in these questions, but well done to those students. Areas for improvement. The students who maybe weren't as successful as they could have been, some didn't realise that this question required an obtuse angle. Now, whether they didn't read the question to the last word in the first sentence, or whether they just didn't know how to do that, we're not sure about, but there's 2 bits of advice. Make sure you read the question to the end. And secondly, a few students tried to do it using SOHCAHTOA, realizing that this was not a right angled triangle. And again, use your reference sheet when it's given to you. I'll move on to question 25. So question 25 was another common question with standard 2. This question was again done very well, but there was a small amount of candidates who didn't quite understand the difference between annuity and compound interest. The more successful candidates used the table given rather than trying to use the sum of the series of annuities over 8 years. However, this method of using a series was quite common, and as teachers, maybe we need to ensure that the financial maths component of the syllabus is being taught explicitly, as maybe a few of us might be relying on the old series and sequences course and highlighting the series applications more so than the financial maths. Again, the better students just looked up the number in the future value table. Then they multiplied that by a factor of 8 years to quite quickly get the future value of the annuity. Then they're able to apply a common interest formula for the remaining 2 years. Some areas for improvements can include, as mentioned before, understanding the nature of the question to ensure that they are not taking extra time to make unnecessary calculations. So using a series to create an annuity over 8 years did work, and the students did be able to achieve full marks there, but is it time consuming and opening it up to maybe a few careless errors rather than doing it the quick financial mathematics approach. Students do understand the difference between an annuity and compound interest. Those 2 ideas were a little bit blurred between the 2, and realizing that compound interest cannot be calculated from the future value of an annuity table. So again, just understanding the 2 separate kind of payments that we were looking for in that question. Question 29. This caused some difficulties for candidates as it was a show question. So the answer was given to them in the last line, show that A3 equals $8,554.54. This meant the process was much more important than the final answer. Again, the more successful candidates completed the question numerically, as the solution on the side shows, finding the amounts for each of the first 3 years. However, more than half the students, I would estimate, again, employed a series approach. So they wanted to go through using, setting up an expression for A1, then using that expression for A2, then using that expression for A3. This was very time consuming and opened up much more opportunity for errors to occur in their working out. Again, as teachers, we maybe need to ensure that students are given an opportunity to answer financial maths questions numerically and not always opt for going straight to the series-based approach. The better students were able to use the recurrence relationship and manually calculate each of the first 3 terms of the annuity, and the students who used this approach very rarely had any difficulty. Understanding that the first $1,000 payment was made at the end of the first year and did not accrue interest in the first year. So reading the question very carefully and making sure they understand when the interest was being applied and then when the payment was being made. And again, I make that point there that the more successful students did work numerically rather than algebraically based series approach. That's something maybe we do need to bear in mind. Areas for improvements of this question. So the students who maybe made errors were mainly couldn't differentiate between payments made at the beginning or the end of a time period. So they weren't applying the interest to the balance and then adding on the new deposit. They were just doing it all and then adding an interest on at the end. Understanding it, since this was a show question, students should clearly show and find the values of A1, A2, and A3 systematically. So you couldn't just create a line that's A2 or the answer for A3. I really wanted them to develop the systematic approach if they're developing a series. And a very common mistake is that students realize that at the end they didn't get the correct answer. They might have been $1,000 short. So on the very last calculation for A3, they would just add $1,000 in to reach the answer because they knew what the answer was going to be. But as this is a show question, you can't just change the last value or the last step in an application. They needed to go back and correct and rearrange every step in the process. So once they realized that they made an error, go back to the start and change the whole approach to the question. That's an area that students could improve a lot on, not just budging the result at the end to come up with the required answer. After 29A, we moved to 29B. Now, 29B did not rely on 29A at all. In fact, the first line told them that after the 17th birthday, Megan has $30,025.83 in their account and do not show this. And most students read that correctly. We didn't have students who did attempt to show that, thankfully. 29B was quite a difficult question, though, when completed correctly using the series-based approach. It was a demanding question. The log equation was challenging one for students to solve, and students should be aware that the front of the examination booklet states that your response should include relevant mathematical reasoning and/or calculations. It's part of our criteria for advanced mathematics. So saying that using a calculator, Megan can withdraw 20 times probably won't satisfy this criteria for full marks in a HSC exam. So the final answer is down the bottom of our solution there, and it is a solution that Megan can make 20 withdrawals of the $2,000. Now, the better students were able to construct a reverse annuity because we knew the total amount she had and she was withdrawing money every time frame. So they're able to create the reverse annuity manually by creating an expression for the amount in the account after any withdrawals. So here's the approach we really do want them to start setting up a series. Once they've created their series, they need to make a sum of a GP of the deductions. Then they had to resolve the equation to a zero balance, so they had to find out when the balance would equal 0. Finally, they had to solve the logarithmic equation, which did utilize a change of base, and it was a difficult process for students, but we had a large proportion of students who were able to handle this question quite well. So congratulations to all those students who were able to handle this question. Okay, areas that we can improve upon. Now, establishing the series or pattern before trying to write down a rule for BN. So we don't just want them to go straight into a general expression for BN. They should be writing down B0, B1, B2, and developing a series through an approach using a series base. Solving a complicated log equation where a lot of students found difficulty. They did the series work beautifully, but it was the log equation they had difficulty with solving. Showing all the steps to minimize errors. Again, this was quite a difficult question. It was worth 3 marks. You're much more likely to experience success if you show all the steps throughout the process, not jumping steps. Checking the answer made sense. So if we got an answer in the hundreds when the answer was, and it was 20, maybe they should see that this question that she's not going to be able to draw 2,000 over 100 times when there's only 30,000 in the account. It just didn't make sense, that answer. So it was a question where they could just have a quick check to see if that answer did make sense. As I mentioned before, there were a number of candidates who opted for the repeated calculator process. So they did the financial math repeated process, added on the interest, withdrew the $2,000, got a new balance, added on the interest, withdrew the $2,000, got the new balance. And they just repeated this process throughout. If they did this successfully, again, they had to address the criteria on the front of the examination paper, which says your responses should include relevant mathematical reasoning and/or calculations. So a series-based approach does show the relevant mathematical reasoning or calculations. If they're doing a repeated calculator process, we needed to see those relevant calculations. And again, writing too many lines down is better than not writing enough lines down, would be my tip if students are going to approach it that way. So overall, it was a quite demanding question, did sort our students out a little bit, but students did this quite well. So well done to all those students. I'll move on to question 32. This was an open response worth 4 marks. It was also a common question with standard 2, and overall was done quite well by advanced cohort. Students need to make sure they follow the directions given by labelling the normal curve. This direction was given in the question to enable students to have a starting point for the question and to begin accessing the marks. So it was stated clearly on the very last line what students had to do. Students also should use the reference sheet to connect the percentages given in the question to z-scores and become familiar with other percentages that can arise from these figures, such as less than 16% is the area below a z-score of -1. So not just knowing the figures on the reference sheet for the z-scores, but then also the other calculations that come from that is very useful. The better students were able to use the given percentages to calculate the location of the normal curve by converting the female heights to the given z-scores. They could use a diagram to calculate the mean and the standard deviation quite well for the female cohort. Then they could calculate a mean and standard deviation for the males based upon the second table given. And finally, to understand that the selected male being 84%, taller than 84% of the population, meant that he was one standard deviation above the mean height for the males. So quite a complicated process for students to have to work through and be able to apply the relevant information for the female, convert it to the male, and then be able to use again the z-scores to find answer the given question. So where some students maybe didn't handle the process quite well is even engaging with the question at the start, using the normal distribution diagram provided as a base for their answers, even though the question stated by first labelling a normal distribution curve below, a few students didn't, and maybe it was the reading, they didn't get that far down into the question. But make sure they follow all the advice that they're given. They also failed to understand and label the normal curve and related it back to the percentages values involved, the 68%, 95%, and 99.7%. This is actually given on the reference sheet. So maybe students need to make sure that they use their reference sheet to see the normal distribution, see the percentages. Students also need to understand the connection between the z-scores, the means, and standard deviation. So how that whole normal distribution works. They had to be able to produce the whole range gamut of the outcomes in that. Also practicing multi-step questions. Like I said at the start, this was 4 marks and it's quite an open response question. There's no part A, part B, part C to guide the students through. It helped them by telling them to label the normal distribution curve, but students really needed to have that practice of doing multi-step questioning and realizing that I need to do step 1 first, then go to step 2, then go to step 3. It did flow quite well for the students as long as they went through the process. And maybe a few students had difficulty with actually being able to apply that type of logic in this setting. But as it was a common question with standard 2, It was designed to be demanding for the students, but our advanced cohort did it quite well. That concludes my presentation, and I hope you found it useful and got some part out of it that you can apply to your teaching practice. And I wish you all the well for the coming years with all the students you teach. Okay, thank you very much.